Chinese authorities sent excavators to destroy a riverbank in Henan province. But when locals tried to stop them, they got doused by pepper spray and had their cars smashed. Civilian rescue teams are taking matters into their own hands. They say authorities failed to provide enough disaster aid. Residents lay flowers at the entrance of a flooded subway station in China's Henan province. Authorities set up barricades there, attracting online criticism. Beijing cracks down on private companies, sending shockwaves through stock markets and sparking fear among American traders. And Hong Kong moves one step closer to communist China. The first person charged under the city's national security law has been found guilty of terrorism and inciting secession. That's over actions related to Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Villagers in central China's Henan province spend days and nights fortifying river embankments to prevent flooding, only to have the dikes destroyed by officials. The two sides are now clashing over it.
It was around 4 a.m. in the morning. Villagers in Henan Xinjiang were sound asleep. Then, Chinese authorities sent excavators there to secretly dig up the river dikes in the village in order to discharge floodwaters. The villagers on guard spotted them. The two sides then clashed violently. The excavators smashed up the villagers' cars near the river embankments. They were parked there to block the excavators from destroying the dikes. And again, in another village in the same province.
The government went to our village and dug our river dikes up.
Residents there spent 2 days fortifying the local river dikes to prevent flooding.
The water level kept rising. The villagers were afraid the river embankments may not stop it, so they began to fortify the river embankments.
Local resident Wang Yan tells the Epoch Times about 500 villagers were guarding the river dikes day and night. To protect her identity, we gave her a pseudonym. Last Thursday night, officers and soldiers suddenly arrived in the village. They tried to dig up the river embankments local residents had fortified. The villagers were desperate.
Many villagers were trying to stop them, otherwise the village would be flooded. And the officers and soldiers that the authorities sent pepper sprayed the villagers' faces. The villagers fell to the ground, and finally they dug up the fortified river dikes.
Wang says the authorities sent about 500 soldiers there. And as a result, her village was flooded. Chinese officials are trying to block information about this village. Electricity and water are now cut off in the village amid the floods. Villagers there are pleading for help.
I am telling the truth, but it was censored online.
Another villager, Li Liang, says there are about 4,000 residents in the village, but no one dared to send out the videos they took when they clashed with the authorities.
As soon as they let the water out, let me tell you how fast that was. The water level in our river used to be about 9 feet, but now it may be about 70 feet.
Chinese media reported that in Xinjiang, the water level is above 5 feet and is still rising.
The floods in Jinzhou City have receded, but the disaster is moving north. Other parts of the province are now suffering. Villagers are getting together to defend their homes.
Some residents in China's Weihui City in Henan province have now been suffering extreme flood damage for a week. All 4 reservoirs there overflowed, drenching the area. As of Tuesday, the floodwater in some streets there still remains over 6 feet deep. Residents have tried to build a levee, or a man-made riverbank, to prevent more floodwater from flowing into the village.
The water level is now level with the riverbank levee and is still rising. Villagers are filling sandbags and blocking the overflow.
But they say they need professional help.
What we need are powerful tools, and some parts of those tools need to be replaced.
Some villagers disclose that they're also suffering from power outages and that cell phone signal is down. But it's not the only area suffering. In a nearby city called Jiazhuo, a resident told us floodwater has been sitting there for days without receding. They say food supplies and housing have also become a problem, and that many locals now rely on relatives and friends for help. Thousands of livestock were also lost to the flooding.
A reservoir on the other side of the mountain released water. Our home is by the stream. Our house was drenched by over 6 feet of water. Now the water has receded, but there's still about 3 feet of water in our home. The house is nearly destroyed. Everything has been damaged. The crops are all soaked. My child says now that our home was gone, he wants to quit school.
As of Tuesday, social media posts pleading for help are circulating online. One of them comes from a county hit particularly hard by flood-inducing landslides and is damaging roads there. Others come from a number of mountain villages that are still waiting for rescue workers.
Reports suggest that authorities aren't providing enough disaster aid to flooded villages in central China. Now, civilian rescue teams are taking matters into their own hands. The Epoch Times interviewed one of the volunteer rescue workers to get his take on the operation. NTD's Don Ma has more.
Many villages affected by the floods in central China did not get official rescue support. That's why some civilian rescue teams are stepping in. The Epoch Times interviewed a volunteer with a civilian rescue organization on Sunday to get his experiences and thoughts on the disaster. The newspaper gave him a pseudonym to protect his identity. Zhang Ye says he realized how severe the flooding was as soon as he arrived in Henan province. Due to heavy rains, Henan officials had to discharge floodwaters from local reservoirs, but they didn't warn residents ahead of time.
We came to Xinxiang today. The situation here is very severe. The floodwaters are receding. The currents are very fast. We had villagers rushing to us to tell us to save them. We came over here 6 in the morning.
Some villages had no working electricity or water. Ye says they rescued over 200 residents. Some were waiting on rooftops. Some were inside their homes.
Electricity and water are not available in all the villages. Over here, floodwaters have submerged the first floor of houses. In some area, the 3rd floor is submerged. Waters are 3 meters deep. This village has a total of more than 3,000 people.
He had noticed that during his rescue work, he didn't see many official rescue personnel.
We didn't contact the government. It would have been slower. We directly contacted the people. Our rescue operation is faster this way.
Ye says that all of the volunteer efforts relief supplies were bought without official funding. That's including lifeboats, medical equipment, and food. He called these non-official rescue groups indispensable, and he says they're just trying to help as much as they can. Don Ma, NTD News.
The dead are not forgotten. On Monday, stacks of flowers were spotted near a subway station in Jinzhou City, with memorial cards tucked inside the bouquets.
I am filled with grief.
They commemorate those that drowned inside the subway cars. Local students also left flowers there and bowed deeply to mourn the victims. A father said at the entrance, a sign beside his bicycle reads, "Daughter, Dad still wants to take you home." But on the same day, local authorities blocked the scene. Videos circulating online show authorities putting 6-foot-tall barricades around the flowers. Local residents were furious. They posted online, "What are you afraid of? What are you unwilling to admit? Don't you know why they died here?" We are not allowed to stay, to watch, to tell others, to discuss, to commemorate, and to express anger. They treat it as if it never happened. The barricades didn't stop local residents from mourning. Many put flowers and cards outside the barricades. A popular online post reads, "Had they blocked the flood on the day of the disaster, they wouldn't have to block people's flowers today." A local Chinese media reported that local residents are taking down the barricades. A wife's search for her missing husband in China has taken a tragic turn. Last Tuesday, Sha Tao became one of the train passengers trapped amid the rising floodwaters inside a subway car. His wife finally found him 6 days later, but by then she could no longer recognize him. Sha's wife posted online, lying in the freezer of the funeral home, labeled anonymous. He was no longer a handsome young man. From now on, I no longer have a husband, my daughter no longer has a father, and our parents no longer have a son. Sha Tao had been on his way home from work last Tuesday when subway line 5 in the city of Jinzhou flooded. That's when he went missing. Sha's wife posted messages and photos of him on Chinese social media, asking for help to look for him. She called local hospitals, but was told her husband wasn't on the list of those found injured or dead. Xiao's wife explained online that first responders seem to make slow progress, writing, "Rescue work has been delayed over and over. Do you know how desperate I am? This is killing me. Time is life." On Monday, Chinese officials announced 2 more deaths from last Tuesday's flooded metro. Xiao was among them. He was 34 years old. The official death toll has now reached 14. Xiao's wife is questioning local authorities over the deadly metro disaster. She writes, flood prevention work was not done properly. Some subway lines had already been flooded, but Metro Line 5 was still operating. After finding water in the subway, passengers were not evacuated in time for more than an hour. Later, accidents were not reported in time, and follow-up searches and rescue work weren't properly done. Xiao's sister also calling for justice, saying, "Brother, the world owes your life to our family. The world owes you. We will definitely get justice for you." The world's largest iPhone assembly plant in Jinzhou City is unaffected by the floods. Taiwan-based iPhone contract manufacturer Foxconn says there has been no direct impact on our facility in Jinzhou to date. The assembly plant there makes almost half of Apple's iPhones. There are around 350,000 employees, and most of them live on factory campuses. Apple CEO Tim Cook has also commented on the floods. He says, "Our thoughts are with everyone affected by the flooding across Henan province. Apple will be donating to support relief efforts." Coming up, Beijing is cracking down on private companies, sending shockwaves through stock markets and sparking fears among American traders. Find out the details and more after the break.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
Amid the Chinese regime's crackdown on its tech sector, an essential Chinese messaging app will be temporarily suspending new user registrations. On Tuesday, developer of the WeChat app Tencent says they will be upgrading their security to align with Chinese laws. And during this time, registration of new WeChat personnel and official accounts will be temporarily suspended. On the same day, Tencent stocks in Hong Kong dropped by a hefty 9%. It's unclear which laws WeChat was referring to, but it comes after China's market regulator said it would bar the firm from exclusive music copyright agreements. It also fined the company for unfair practices in the online music market. Tencent said it would abide by the decision and comply with all requirements. WeChat is a daily necessity for tens of millions in China. Besides sending messages, people also use it to hail rides, transfer money, and do a lot of other things. China is currently tightening privacy and data security policies in the tech sector. Beijing's sweeping crackdowns have devastated Chinese stocks in the U.S. In the past 5 months, Chinese stocks lost close to $770 billion in value. And the crackdowns aren't just impacting Chinese firms listed in the U.S. Hong Kong investors are now selling off Chinese stocks en masse. U.S. media Radio Free Asia reports that investors are selling off a massive 25% of Chinese shares in Hong Kong. After Beijing ordered to rectify large private firms and tech companies, the Hong Kong stock market plunged on Monday. Many major Chinese companies' shares dropped by over 10%. Radio Free Asia estimates the number of investors in the Hong Kong market will decrease in the future, and this downward trend may not be over. It seems that European and American stock markets did not follow Hong Kong's plunge yet. But Beijing's crackdown on private companies is still sending shockwaves through stock markets. American traders fear that the crackdown will spread to other sectors. NTD's Colin Fredrickson asked an expert about what investors should do next.
Investors who hold Chinese stocks are facing growing risks while Beijing keeps cracking down on private businesses. Chinese tech companies just lost hundreds of billions of dollars in market value, and the sell-off hasn't ended. Joseph Trevisani, senior analyst at FX Street, says that the Chinese regime is concerned about losing control.
Tech companies control a lot of information access in China. And China is not a free or open information access society. And this is a direct threat.
And on top of that, he says the regime wants to avoid public unrest. Current inflation rates might generate objection among Chinese consumers.
So I think one of the things that they're trying to do with the crackdown is to frighten companies into not raising prices so that they don't have this flooding out into the consumer economy.
Oliver Jones, senior markets economist at Capital Economics, says these events show that the authorities are more willing to upset investors than before. And large investors have already started to unload their shares. Cathie Wood cut holdings to less than 0.5% this month. The sell-offs and drastic moves show the decline in investor confidence. After targeting tech companies, Chinese officials recently turned to the education sector. Fast-growing tutoring companies are now barred from turning a profit and from raising funding on stock markets. Tencent dropped 9% in Hong Kong and has hit its worst day in a decade. And now Chinese regulators issued new guidance for food delivery workers, shortly after shopping platform Meituan plunged. Tencent, Alibaba, and Meituan combined have lost almost $240 billion over the last 48 hours. But Trevisani says investors should not pull out of Chinese stocks just yet.
It's not something that is developing sort of organically in the economy. It's a top-down, ordered change in behavior and a warning. That will eventually be withdrawn.
He says once that has happened, the Chinese stock market will likely revert to normal economic behavior. Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
China's military is racing to catch up with the U.S. A think tank says that its aspirations are being hindered by its socialist command economy. American think tank Rand Corporation says China's reliance on stealing intellectual property means its weapons are years behind. China has recognized that now and is investing in growing its capabilities through joint ventures and the acquisition of foreign technology. The Rand report was drafted for the U.S. Army and outlines how China is moving away from its model of copying other countries. The first person charged under Hong Kong's national security law was found guilty of terrorism and inciting secession. It's a landmark case with long-term implications for how the new law reshapes the city's common law traditions. Here's more from Hong Kong.
The first person charged under Hong Kong's national security law was found guilty on Tuesday. 24-year-old Tong Ying Kit was found guilty of terrorism and inciting secession. In the landmark case, which has long-term implications for how the legislation reshapes the city's common law traditions. An alternative charge of dangerous driving causing grievous bodily harm was not considered. Tong, a former waiter, is accused of carrying a flag with the protest slogan, "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times," and driving his motorbike into officers during a protest last July, shortly after the security law was enacted. The charges could lead to a prison term of several years to life. His sentencing will be announced at a later date. His trial tests the limits of free speech in Hong Kong, as prosecution and defense argued over the meaning of the slogan, widely used during the city's mass protests in 2019. Pro-democracy activists and human rights groups see Tong's case as a departure from Hong Kong's common law traditions, since he was denied bail and a jury trial. The three judges at Tong's trial were picked by Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam to hear national security cases. Both Beijing and Hong Kong's governments have repeatedly said the security law was necessary to bring stability back to the city.
The UK may remove China's state-owned nuclear power company from its projects. The Financial Times reports that the government is exploring ways to decouple. NTD's Patrick Henan has the story.
The UK is looking to decouple from China's CGN nuclear power company. The Financial Times reports that the government plans to block CGN from the new Sizewell plant. The plant is in England and is worth more than $27 billion. One nuclear expert says CGN has become good and quick at making nuclear plants. But there is another reason for working with the China state-backed provider.
Part of the reason why CGN were brought in was that they were going to bring a significant amount of money.
In 2019, the Trump administration warned the UK about letting China get involved in critical infrastructure. In 2017, an American engineer was sentenced to 2 years in prison. He worked with CGN to leak nuclear power technology to China.
Well, the US has been consistently right on CGN, and the reason for that is it itself has seen the cost. American companies were the victims of a plot in which CGN was a defendant, in which a Chinese engineer pled guilty to stealing nuclear secrets and passing them back to CGN. It had seen the damage that this company can do firsthand.
Armstrong says the Trump administration, and in particular diplomat Christopher Ashley Ford at the State Department, helped warn about the dangers of CGN. CGN invested heavily in Britain's Hinkley Point nuclear power station.
Pounds, perhaps $10 billion. That's quite a lot of money. And if we don't have CGN as the investor, the other major investor in the plant, the question is who will be?
Rulestone says if state-backed French firm EDF doesn't provide its share of investment to the UK, then these nuclear projects won't work. EDF is currently working closely with the UK government, and if funding is secured, the CGN portion of investment will not be very concerning. The new Sizewell plant deal is expected to exclude CGN. It is similar to the agreement with Hinkley Point, which CGN already works on. Armstrong's asking why they aren't retrospectively looking to do something about Hinkley.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, here's a clip of our latest special report on Beijing's war with China's Uber Didi. A few weeks ago, the Chinese Communist Party sent many American investors on a roller coaster ride. It all started with what looked like a major investment opportunity.
Chinese ride-sharing giant Didi about to make its debut on Wall Street with an IPO expected to raise $4 billion.
Didi, a Chinese tech giant and rideshare company, was coming to the U.S. stock market. The company was looking to sell stock shares to the American public and raise big money in a process called Initial Public Offering, or IPO.
So this looks to be one of the largest IPOs this year globally, if not potentially the biggest IPO.
The move was creating a lot of buzz, and Didi looked like it had potential. It's known as China's Uber equivalent and a dominant player in the industry landscape. Didi owns almost 90% of China's rideshare market. With over 400 million users in the country, it completes over 20 million rides a day. From government officials to the average Joe, Didi's app is the go-to in China for catching a ride. Even Uber got a taste of Didi's power. A few years ago, Uber tried to break into China's market and found Didi as its biggest rival. After rounds of cutthroat competition, Uber was squeezed out of the country's market and ended up selling its Chinese operations to Didi. Despite holding all the trump cards, a rideshare service is a tough business, and Didi has been losing money.
In 2020, it lost $2 billion, and for the first quarter, $1 billion. So the losses are staggering.
The company started to rebound in the first quarter of 2021 amid pandemic recovery measures. By that point, Didi was eager to raise capital. To do it, the company looked to the biggest stock market in the world, the New York Stock Exchange.
The U.S. Really is the capital for global financial markets. It garners a global investor base in addition to a very large asset management community, and therefore there's really only one place you can do an IPO the size of Didi, which is here in the United States, which is why they chose it over the Hong Kong listing.
And Didi got the big money it was hoping for. The day it went public, the company raised over $4 billion and sold more than 300 million shares, more than it originally planned to offer. But what happened after left many dumbfounded. In just 48 hours, the Chinese Communist Party went after Didi, ordering a cybersecurity review of the company. And it didn't stop there. 2 days later, the crackdown escalated. Beijing took down Didi's app and suspended the company from registering new users. But that wasn't the last of it. In an even larger blow, the regime soon removed 25 other Didi-owned smartphone applications from app stores. 7,000 miles away on the other side of the ocean, American investors are feeling the impact. Beijing's crackdown sent Didi's stock shares into free fall. At one of its lowest points, the shares were down over 30%, wiping out billions of dollars in market value. Share prices also dropped for other Chinese companies after the news broke. That includes major giants like Tencent, Baidu, and Alibaba. The biggest question here is, why the sudden crackdown? Beijing has been vague about its reasons, saying Didi violated laws against collecting personal data. But even before the listing, the company had already been on Beijing's radar. To watch the full episode, please click on the link below. And if there's any topics you want us to cover, please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.